you've written this new book called Communion.
Yeah.
Which is about, the subtitle is Finding My Way Back to Faith. Back to faith.
Yeah, that's right.
So for your 30s, you became atheist? In your late 20s?
Yeah, I would say in my 20s, in my early 20s. So I was raised in an evangelical household, very conservative, very evangelical Christianity. My grandmother was one of these people, she read the Bible 5-6 times a day. She prayed 5-6 times a day, was a woman, Mama was devoutly religious, but we were what you would call unchurched. So I would go to church with my dad. I would occasionally go to church with my mom, occasionally with my mamaw, but our religion was very much experienced at home. It was, you would watch televangelists on TV, you would watch Billy Graham revival things on TV, but we didn't go to church that much. And so, I got to a point in my life where I just felt like my faith wasn't speaking to me anymore. It didn't seem to have particular relevance to my life. There was a certain, new atheist element to it where I assumed that I knew more than these, bumpkins that had raised me. And, her faith is all superstition. I'm rational and I'm a college educated kid and I know things that other people don't. So there's a certain intellectual arrogance that was built into it. But sort of all these things kind of swam together. But fundamentally, I think that with all love and affection of my grandmother, I think the thing about my faith that just never took root is that I never saw why it actually mattered that much. It was just a thing. It was in the background. It was something we believed. I really did believe this stuff when I was a teenager, but it didn't really matter. And so when that boy collided with reality and collided with a lot of things that were going on in the world, I just was not properly prepared to actually integrate my faith into this new world.
When did you realize that it mattered?
So I become an atheist. I'm sort of one of these like angry atheists, where I'll like argue with people who say that they're religious and I pretend that I'm smarter than everybody else. And it was like very embarrassing in hindsight. But, I go back, and so just a flaw that I have, all of us have many flaws, many virtues, but a flaw that I have is I wanted to rise above. Now, where it came from a good place is I wanted stability. I wanted a decent income. I wanted to provide my kids that stability that I didn't have. But where it was a very bad thing is I cared way too much about what credentials I had. Where did I go to school? How much money that I made? And so this sort of new atheism actually was like the perfect philosophy for the creed of a kid who just wanted to get ahead. I wanted to make as much money. I wanted to have the most prestigious profession. I was super ambitious for ambition's sake. And, so I'd won every competition that life had put before me. I'm at this point in my late 20s. I've got a beautiful girlfriend. Things are going pretty well. I'm at Yale Law School, right? The top law school in the United States of America, very prestigious. Everybody thought I was very smart because I went to Yale Law School, and I cared about that back then. I don't care about it now. And I sort of realized I'm actually not like a happy person. I'm not a good person. I care about where I went to law school way more than whether I'm good to this girl, right? I really was like madly in love with her, but was I like a particularly good boyfriend? No. I learned from my youth to be chaotic, and I'd threaten to break up with her every other month. And, if we had an argument, I'd just like disappear for a couple of days. I was just like not, I sort of realized, okay, there's something missing here. There's something that all of this obsession with achievement and being smarter than everybody else and being rational, it has not actually made me a good person. And I sort of looked around and said, well, who are the people that I like actually want to be like? Who are the people that I most admire in the world? And I slowly realized that the ones who are the most virtuous, the ones who are the best at the things that actually mattered, they were Christians. And their faith motivated not an obsession with getting ahead, but an obsession with treating people well, or an obsession with developing the strength of character that mattered so that you could withstand, very tough circumstances. And I started to think to myself, okay, wait a second. There's like these rays of sunshine from Christians that I knew in my life, from Christian ideas that sort of were in the background of my own, intellectual curiosity. And if there are all of these rays of sunshine where Christianity seems to be warmer and truer than something else, maybe the rest of it actually has something to be said for it too. And that kind of led me down a pathway of thinking about my faith in a way that I never had when I was a teenager. I never had to when I was a teenager. And it finally just hit me like, there is something deeply profound about this. And at first it was an intellectual thing, right? But over time, it became a more emotional and more practice thing. And eventually I got baptized. I'd never been baptized as a kid. And, even though my wife is not Christian, I force her to take our 3 kids and husband to church every single week. And she's remarkably patient about it. But it's one of these things where it really did transform me, but in a slower way.
Atheism is a form of religion in a way, isn't it?
Exactly.
It has the same level of sort of certainty. And that's why I
exactly
introduced
right.
myself to you as an agnostic, because it feels a little bit arrogant to say that I know.
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
I'm going to take a little bit of a hard turn, which is AI. AI is going to cause a lot of job disruption.
Sure.
And, it's a big topic of conversation for my audience, but also as an entrepreneur and investor, we're talking a lot at the moment about the impact of AI. When you look at the words of the big AI CEOs over time, one thing I find fascinating is if you look at Sam Altman's words about the impact AI is going to have, it's very dystopian. You look at Elon, very, very dystopian.
Yeah.
And right now, I think the only thing that's up there with being as unpopular as AI is ICE in the US. I saw this graph the other day in terms of how unpopular it is. Eric Schmidt, who I know you know, because he was an investor in your company, I believe.
Yeah.
The other day when he was doing that commencement speech in front of the college students, he was booed every time he said the word.
That's right.
Are you scared about the potential economic impact and unemployment impact of artificial intelligence at this moment in time?
So I'd say I'm less scared about that than I am about other things. Okay. So historical analogies are always fraught. And by the way, I think the AI companies themselves, the CEOs, there's a certain incentive to be super dystopian because it's like a form of viral marketing. That if people are really scared of your product, that must mean that it really works. And if they're not scared of your product, maybe it actually doesn't work that well. So I think there's something weird. There's something synergistic about the most pessimistic predictions about AI and some of the people who are making them. But set that to the side because I do have some real concerns. But on the job displacement thing, okay, so let me back up for a second because I bring a certain bias to this. So when I was, again, this is an almost religious idea that I developed in the early 2010s that I think is just preposterous now. And that religious idea was that there was this inevitable march of economics from agricultural to industrial to service-based. Mm-hmm. And the reason that all of my friends and family were losing their jobs was because that was just an inevitable economic trend that advanced economies, they deindustrialized, okay? And there was even this argument at the time that the reason why manufacturing employment was going down in the United States was because of automation, because of technology, that it had nothing to do with outsourcing or with immigration, but it was purely because of technology had replaced all these workers with robots. I think that story is totally false. Now, the robots that exist in manufacturing, did they make people more productive? Absolutely. Did they cause a change in what a manufacturing line worker was doing in, say, 2005 versus 1955? Absolutely. So the change is there. But in reality, there was a ton of manufacturing job growth. It just wasn't happening in the United States of America. And I think sometimes we tell ourselves a story that technology always leads inevitably to job loss to make up for the fact that what often leads to job loss among populations is either outsourcing or immigration. You ship the job to another country or you have somebody else take the job of somebody who currently has it. So what do I think is actually going on with AI? I think, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, right, the last significant major disruption in the labor market, you actually had way more people working at the end of the Industrial Revolution than you did beforehand. Again, some of the jobs were different. There was some job disruption. But when I look at AI, I don't see mass unemployment as the most likely consequence. I think people will become more productive. I think some people's jobs will change. Some people will lose their jobs. But I just don't buy this idea, and I haven't seen any evidence in the data that it's going to lead to mass unemployment. Let me tell you what does worry me. Again, historical analogies are always fraught. You go back to the Industrial Revolution. Was mass joblessness the main consequence of the shift from an agricultural to an industrial economy? No. But what did happen? Rich people got way richer. And that led to, in Europe, fascism and communism. In fact, your country and my country are pretty much the only two countries that successfully avoided either a fascist or a communist revolution in response to the Industrial Revolution. That's, by the way, one of the real interesting things about, Christianity is the seminal text about how capital and labor could work together, about how you could have social harmony, compared to Marx, who was sort of saying there was an inevitable social division, was Pope Leo XIII, who wrote in his famous encyclical that the way to preserve harmony between the social classes was to ensure that the workers could bargain. This is where sort of the idea of collective bargaining had a Christian underpinning, and to make sure that the capitalists weren't able to take advantage of the workers. They had to sort of respect them. And that model of social harmony, I think, is something we're either going to follow, that Christian concept of social harmony in the age of AI, or we're going to wake up and we're going to realize that rich people have gotten way richer. The average American, the average Brit, the average Western society member has stagnated, and people really hate relative poverty. You can give people iPhones and you can give people the creature comforts of a 21st century economy. But if you make rich people way richer, you're going to have significant problems. And so I think that is like one of the consequences that I see from AI. The one other, just because you asked about it, the other thing I really worry about with AI is surveillance. AI is, a friend of mine once said that AI is fundamentally a communist technology, in that it allows governments and corporations to surveil people in very profound and different ways. And that scares me a lot. Like, I don't want a social credit system that's powered by AI. I don't want you to not be able to buy a beer because some tech CEO has given you a score based on an artificial intelligence algorithm that nobody actually understands. That scares me too. But I don't think we're going to have mass unemployment. We might have mass inequality. That's its own problem. It's a different problem, though.
According to the current 2026 Federal Reserve and Census Bureau data, financial inequality in the United States has reached its highest level in nearly 4 decades. And obviously, we've seen this headline this week of the US's first trillionaire. Yeah. Which again has been talked about everywhere around the world and is now sparked this debate. You think about the explosion we're seeing in robotics and Elon Musk's pay packet rewarding him for getting a million humanoid robots out there at a certain timeline. And Elon himself saying there'll be 1 billion humanoid robots at some point. There'll be more humanoid robots than humans. It appears to me that there will be some kind of job disruption. Obviously there's new jobs created, which are like hard to forecast.
Yeah.
And you've got these big frontier model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic that are going to be benefactors of this evolution. Wealth is presumably going to accrue to these large corporations, the Metas, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs. How do you think about, we already have crazy inequality. How do you think about redistributing that wealth? Bernie Sanders is saying people need to own 50% of these AI companies.
Which the president, by the way, likes that idea too.
He likes it.
He likes that idea. I don't know that he would say 50%, but he does like that idea. So there's a concept in like the social welfare literature of redistribution versus predistribution. The idea of predistribution is that you give workers and you give people, normal people, a seat at the bargaining table. And I don't think it's just economic. The economic thing, by the way, is very important. Like you want the worker whose life has been transformed by this technology to have a seat at the table. You want them to be able to actually bargain with the company for better wages. Now, that's impossible if you think about it. Like the individual worker to negotiate against, Dario from Anthropic, it's not going to happen. But workers working together, this is where the idea of collective bargaining came from. But there's all kinds of interesting things. And again, I think there's like a deeply Christian concept to this. I know you're sort of, fascinated by faith, but not a person of faith yourself. There is a very deeply Christian concept that you have to give everybody in the country a seat at the table. So for example, there's the economic piece of it. What about the cultural piece of it? How will AI transform the culture that we consume, that we distribute, that we make? Back in the 50s and 60s, it was broadly accepted that, now it wasn't a censorship regime, there was nothing legal going on here, but it was broadly accepted that Hollywood would consult with the religious leaders at the time in order to ensure that the content they were making was actually consistent with the sensibilities of their membership and consistent with some basic Christian ideas. Again, that wasn't forced, but there was this mechanism that gave everybody a seat at the table. And I think that's one of the bad things about there are many bad things about the decline of institutional Christianity in this country, but we do not have a mechanism that gives powerful people, that forces them to actually work with everybody else.
So do you
Religion was one of the ways that happened in the West. I think probably the most profound and effective way that happened in the West. We just don't have it anymore, and I really worry about that.
So the president is supportive of the United States owning these big AI companies.
He likes the idea, as sort of a sovereign wealth fund idea, of the United States taking some stake in these AI companies. He said so publicly. I'm not breaking news. But, the president, he is a very unconventional person. You would say a Republican's not supposed to think like that. The president doesn't care. The president just thinks the thoughts that he has. He develops them, whether they're, he tries to determine, is this a good idea or a bad idea? I would call him sort of a radical pragmatist, though I think most Europeans think that he's this hyper ideological person. He's extremely pragmatic about this stuff. But one very important thought. The idea that we're going to allow these companies, let's say 10, 20 years down the road, to accumulate trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth, and then we're going to be able to successfully redistribute it to workers, I'm very skeptical of that. Very skeptical of that. I think that's a very modern, I'd call it a liberal concept, this idea that you can just tax people and give it to poor people and it works out. Then you turn the poor people into effectively subservience of the rich people. You have to give everybody a stake in the society. I haven't quite figured out how this is going to work in the age of AI. I think labor unions are a very important model here, but this is the model where you just take from some people and give to other people. That's never provided a stable society. You've got to give the workers a seat at the table.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.